thought I'd do a print based on some old plates that didn't work out. I thought I'd do a dry point to start out with, because that's a pretty easy, direct process to use. The only trouble with dry point when you're working direct on the plate is that everything comes out backward. So when you're doing your drawing, you're not really sure it's going to work unless you use things like mirrors to look at it, or transfer a pencil drawing on transfer paper and then carbon paper and all that kind of nonsense. But I've always believed in working direct on the plate. I've always believed that the plate metal itself, or wood, or whatever it is you're using, has something to say, has a voice in your work. And I was thinking about a friend of mine who is a musician. Mark is a musician. And I think he'd probably agree with me that when you're writing a song, you work with what's around you. You don't necessarily go by lyrics that are all ready finished. You kind of work with what's in your mind or what's around you. And that's kind of how it is when I'm starting this plate. I'm just working with what's in my tray of partly cut plates and partly worked over plates, and kind of like recycling industrial material. And I think about a lot of songs are written that way, where you're kind of recycling material that came out of industry or personal experience or something. You work with something else that's sort of partly used or already started. These are old plates that I started a long time ago and never finished. It might have been experiments, it might have been something I was teaching or something. They're copper, 22 gauge, and I'm going over them with what looks like double-aught steel wool. And then I'm going to polish it. It's polished like a mirror. But the other one, I didn't polish at all. I just left the tooth of the steel wool on it, kind of foggy. And I just got the idea that maybe I'll just make a two-plate print. And I'll start by drawing an outline around this other plate. That's what I mean when you're composing and you're writing and you're trying to create a new thing. It's like writing a song. Could be, where you work with what's right in front of you, and you change your mind. If you're taking a walk, for example, thinking about a song, and you're walking a path you've always walked, it's very familiar, something might take hold of you, and you might say, well, I'm going to take a different route. Let's, on an impulse, go somewhere else. It might be like that when you write a song, when you write music. I'm not a musician, but I can identify with musicians. The creative process is probably the same for any kind of art. This is dry point. I'm just scratching on the plate, not putting a lot of pressure on it. If I put too much pressure on it, I'd probably break this needle. This needle is called a Whistler style etching needle. Real popular dry point needle. You keep it sharp on a sharpening stone. Makes a nice little line. Of course, you don't know what kind of line it is till you put some ink in it and wipe it off. But I can wait. I like the surprise. If I wait a while, I don't know while I'm working what kind of a line it might be making. Now, on impulse again, come up in here and just make some random lines. I don't have anything in mind except the feel right now. Now I'm getting curious as to how this is going to look, so I think I will stop and get some ink and work it in and see what kind of lines I'm getting. I have some leftover ink from a little gig I had last Saturday. I'll just use some of that. It's an oil-based etching ink, mixture of black and brown. I'll work that into those dry point lines. Thin coat. And it's typical then, after you've got the lines filled, to wipe it back off. And there's a lot of ways you can wipe it back off. Here's one way with a piece of telephone book paper. Go gentle on it so you've got a true idea of what you have down. Those lines are very faint, but it's a start. The thing about dry point, they like to say about dry point, is that it's got a real softness about it, a soft line. Well, that's because there's never really much of a groove for the ink to sit in, not like an etching. Etchings have pretty deep, sharp lines. Dry points, it's just a burr, actually. It's just a little metal burr that's been thrown up like a plow having gone through a field. And it's that burr that catches the ink. So it makes a soft line. It's pretty, but it doesn't last long. So far I don't have much going, but if I start bearing down on the needle harder, and again rub some ink into it and rub it off again, you can see what a difference it's going to make. If I decide that that's just too light, faint, plus it won't stand up for very many prints. When I say very many, I think, from this plate I could probably get about 6 before it began to flatten out. You couldn't see much. But you can dig down as deep as your tool will allow and get it to be pretty dark. And this is the way I like to work with dry point when I'm just improvising on the plate. I suppose it's a little bit like that music too. You're just sort of improvising and kind of trying out different melodies, different time, different arrangements. You come up with different results. Now let's see how that outside one works. Put a little ink in there. Now this is the back of an old plate that got accidentally etched. So there's already the beginnings of an image there. Like I said, it's sometimes better to go with what you have found laying around than it is to start with a brand new store-bought plate. Whole hum, not very interesting. Whereas when you start with something that's a little beat up, a little overused, maybe not even intended to be what an art material is supposed to be. So that's going to be a kind of a frame. I might go with 2 colors down the road, but again, I don't know. I don't have a clear idea as to what I'm doing. I don't like to work that way. I like to work with like I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, I've been doing that wiping with paper, telephone book pages, and I've got them both inked up and wiped. Clean off the edges a little bit. And I've got my press set up. Not actually my press. This press is going to a man named Peter in California, I believe. I've got some paper. I soaked this paper for 15 or 20 minutes. and get the excess water off of it. The paper is called Magnani, gray paper. I want to print the background plate first. Pressure's on. Always use two hands when you check your pressure and tighten your pressure. You can feel it change when you're going through. That'll be the first time through. That'll be what I call the background plate. Now I have squeezed out some of the moisture from the paper, so this second proof is not going to have the benefit of such soft paper, but it'll be all right, I think. And I'm just going to try to eyeball it, figure out about where it lands. And just to be sure I got a good impression, I'm going to go over it twice. And this isn't necessarily good because it's going to wear out that dry point. The more times you run it through, the more it flattens out the burr. Always write a moment number on your print. You want to play proximates. It's 4 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, so that makes it 1600. The year is 11, the month is 11, and the day is 3. November 3rd, 1600. Now I can pull the proof. Now I've got both colors. Of course, I use the same brown, so can't really tell which plate is which, but it's all an exercise. It's all a matter of improvising and feeling it out. After a while, you might get an idea and start pushing it this way or that, but get the quality of the dry point. Hi, I'm Bill Ritchie, and a friend of mine gave me the idea of taking an image from the web, processing the picture in Photoshop, and then printing it out on a laser print on silicone-backed label stock. This is shipping label paper, and I printed these 2 pictures out of my friend, actually, and I thought I would transfer that to copper and then etch it and print it for this little videotape. But before I transfer it, I thought I'd do a little marking up on the laser print in the black areas with I've got a X-Acto knife here, and I can scratch off the toner like that, so it's not just a straight photograph. One of the advantages of this process is that you can write on it. You can, write longhand, or you can print words and whatnot, and they'll be coming out, just like they would, like white writing on black ground. But when you transfer it to the plate, they'll be backward, but when you print them, they'll be rightward again. So if you want to write in your etching, or put numbers in or something like that, this is a good way to do it. There. Now I've made a pretty good mess of it. Next I have to take several steps. First I've already beveled the edge of the copper plate so it's not sharp. Don't want it to hurt my laminator, which is one of the next steps, or my felts in my printing press when I print it. So I beveled the edges. I've scrubbed it down with some fine steel wool just to kind of take the shine off of it. And then I have to degrease it. Degreasing means you wash it with vinegar and salt, let it dry, and then I'll put these two together and run them through the laminator. Run it through about 4 or 5 times. Just be sure that that plate is completely hot, and the laser toner will stick to the copper plate. Like I said, do that about 4 or 5 times. And then I bake it in a toaster oven, and I don't know what the setting is, like 350 degrees, 400 degrees, something like that. And that will make sure that that toner is well fused to the copper plate, very hard. I can still do some work in the black area, so while that's heating up, maybe I'll just try that. But the ground isn't very strong right now. It's kind of fragile. It needs to be fused even harder. It's kind of a dull look to it. When I'm done fusing it in the oven, it'll be kind of shiny, and that's when it's the toughest. Beautiful. You may have noticed when I peeled back the paper, there was one little tiny spot there, and that's where it is here. And when you see that happen, that means you've got to put something there to keep that from being a big hole, which is what's going to happen if I etch it the way it is. So I'm going to put some tiny specks of some stop out. I'm going to use a universal etching ground. It's really easy to handle. Well, now it's ready to etch, and I'm going to put some of this transparent contact paper on the back so that the etchant won't eat away on the back of it, and wrap up the extra areas with shipping tape or something like that. Most people use ferric chloride, and ferric chloride is a good etchant. It's odorless, not toxic, pretty harmless to human beings. But it eats copper and brass. But you have to etch it upside down. That's the only funny thing about it. But that's pretty easy to overcome that little obstacle. So I recommend ferric chloride. It's about a quarter of an inch, half inch maybe above the bottom of the tray. This is not fresh ferric chloride. It's been used a number of times. I don't know how many times. I just use it until it's not working anymore, and then I throw it away. I wash it down the drain with lots and lots of running water. It's a mineral salt. It's no more harmful than table salt, in my opinion, as far as the environment goes. I would welcome anybody to tell me otherwise. Looks like it's not quite deep enough to cover that in, so I think I'll add a little more from my gallon jug. I'll bite this for about 10 minutes, or I don't know. I won't know how deep it's etched until I take it out and look at it with a magnifier. The way I make prints is in stages. I do it through many stages, or states they're called. And I don't even take a print until I really have no idea what it's going to look like. And then I take a trial proof. Sometimes I'm lucky and it works the first time, but usually not. Usually I have to go back and rework it. When I make my Halfwood presses, I usually test them with this kind of process, and sometimes I get to make a brand new plate to test each one. This one is kind of an experiment to see how that process of taking photographs off the web or any kind of digital photograph, treat it with Photoshop, and transfer it to metal plate with the laser printer on silicone transfer paper, which is just the backing from label stock that I threw away the labels and used the back, the shiny side of the back. If I agitate this constantly, it's better than if I just let it sit. Probably speeds it up about twice. Whereas it might take 5-10 minutes sitting still. If I agitate it, it'll probably go in 5 minutes. Now I've rinsed it all off, and looks pretty nice. I can see it better if I give it some of that vinegar and salt treatment again. I call this pickling it with vinegar and salt. That cleans it up, brings all that, takes all that oxides out, makes it more visible. And now I think I could probably print it. I'll look at it with a magnifier just to be sure. It was about 10 minutes, I think. I'll block that dry. I look at it with a magnifier. Give me a better idea how much etch is there. Not much, but you don't want to etch too long. If you do etch too long, it'll bite away some of the finest spots. But now I can print it after I strip off the plastic back. Dry it off completely, ink it up, print it. Now, most people would tell you you have to take the ground off first, but lately I've been thinking, well, what for? Why not just leave it on and see what happens? Besides, if you decide you want to etch it some more, you'll have pretty good ground on it already. Plus, there are some other etching techniques to try, like aquatint. Ready to print. I made a lot of videos of printing plates, so you can always look at those, but this is really hard because it's got that black ground on it, and I can't tell. I really can't tell how I'm doing, because usually I have some black ink tone to look at. Now, the most I have is a little bit of reflection, but I'm going to print it anyway. Interesting way to work, and I love surprises. I'm printing on a Fabriano paper, and I soaked it for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. Then I blotted off all the excess water. I'm printing on the press that's going to my friend. I warmed the plate before I printed. I set the pressure using 2 hands. You're never sure about the pressure till you printed a print. Incidentally, when I'm done with this video, I'll probably put it in the Press Ghost, which is this flash drive that I build into all my Halfwood presses now. It has lots of videos on it, books and things. And I always put on a moment number for my game Proximates. Let's see, this is the year is 11, the month is 11, the day is the 15th, and it's 17:30. There it is. A little weird, but pretty good start. Very dark. And this area up in here, which is all supposed to be black, will have to take some reworking. And that'll be for the next part of the video. When you, that next part is about going back into the plate, and you could etch it, or you could dry point, you could do aquatint. I'm going to demonstrate dry pointing because my friend, I think my friend wants to do dry point, and that's a very direct process. Now that you've got the image going and you've got a trial proof, you can make some judgments and start doing the dry point, and then as you go along you can work on it. And I might also strip that foreground or that laser tone off of there to make it a little easier to see what you're doing when you're doing the dry point. I think that's a good idea. To get that toner off, you work with lacquer thinner, and so with lacquer thinner you want to have plenty of ventilation going. A fan, go outside, whatever you can do, but don't breathe the stuff. It'll rot your brain and make you paranoid. Clean it out real well. Soft, stiff brush. Try not to scratch the plate very much, but we can always remove scratches with a burnisher later on. At this stage, there's a product you can use, rubbing compound from automobile paint finishing product, and there's one for printmakers called Putz Pomade. But if you can polish your plate with this stuff, and you'll begin to see how the image really looks without that black background on it. In my workshop I have a buffing wheel, so if I want to I can really put a high polish on this before I go to the next step, which is to use some dry point. Now you can see what it would look like if you ink it, and I like to etch the plate very lightly with the photo images on it because I'm not that crazy about simply reproducing a photograph. But the photograph, as I said, gives me a start when it's a person. I'm not that great at portraiture. And it also gives you the basis for your soft ground, which is coming. Now what I've done is I've spread ink into it, and this is tarlatan fabric. It's a stiff cheesecloth like material, so it doesn't soak up the oils of the ink, but it traps the excess ink and distributes it. I learned this method from one of the people that bought my press. She showed me to do this. It's a slow process, and I'm not going to print this yet. I'm going to print it when I really don't know what it looks like, after I do some dry point. After so much of this tarlatan, you can bring it up even brighter with telephone book pages. That's going to give you the most contrast. A dry point, the term simply means there's no liquids involved. There's no mordants, no ferric chloride, no acids, and so forth. It used to be a touch-up technique in the old days when they would do an etching or an engraving, and they saw some places that needed to be changed. They didn't go back and bother with all the etching. They just take a needle to it and fix it. I think that's the story, the history of dry point. Remember, printmaking was always a reproduction process until modern art came along. Now, what's bothered me about this print for this image has been this area here, which is all shadow. He's wearing a hat. My friend is wearing a hat, and the hat is making this shadow all over here. And since it was solid in the laser print, it would completely protect it. And I would normally, if I were doing a straight etching, I would use aqua tint in this area and make it rough so that it trapped ink nicely. But I'm going to stick with dry point because I feel like it. After you've made some scratches with this, I'm using what they call a Whistler style etching needle. Sometimes it's called a scribe. And from here on out, you're going to be using a scribe like this, an etching needle. Sometimes it's what's called a scraper, and another one called a burnisher. But first, before I can sort of look at this thing, I wanted to get these areas that are supposed to be dark, make them dark. Now, I might be making them too dark. I don't know yet until I rub ink into it, wipe them off again. And this is where I think the real creative process starts, is when you are working back into the image, the camera image, the photo image. Now if I rub ink into it and wipe it off again, it's looking more like it's supposed to, like there's a shadow under his hat. The use of the dry point makes the texture of the picture look entirely different. So there's going to be a lot of needlework, a lot of dry point from here on out, where I'll be going back over and trying to create some harmony between the handmade lines and the camera lines. At some point, the dry point and your drawing takes over and practically eliminates the photo image. But that's just that's an artistic process, and there's really not much more I can say about that.
Now I like to sit down and focus more and use the other tools like the burnisher and the scraper primarily. You think of these as being sort of like erasers, and of course the needle is more like the drawing tool. When you do dry point, it's really just a little burr that you're throwing up with the needle. The needle throws up a burr like a plow going through the field, throwing up a furrow. And it's the burr that actually catches the ink and gives dry point that typical kind of soft look people talk about. And the opposite of that is the scraper, which takes off the burr, but it leaves that little fine line. So you're building up a kind of a webwork of lines and burrs. The burnisher is similar. It flattens the burr out, polishes the plate. So if you have highlights in the image, the burnisher brings out those highlights even more. There's a technique called mezzotint, which uses exclusively the burnisher, a whole set of different burnishers, and a plate that's a complete web of burrs. Oh, I picked up the scraper by accident, and I was going to pick up the needle, but I should mention too that the tip of the scraper is needle sharp, and so it can be a drawing tool. My goal is to basically eliminate the photograph and replace it with my own drawing. It would help if I had the person here sitting as a portrait, and then I'd have a little more feeling for the real individual, or I could have a photograph sitting in front of me and kind of guide my decisions. But the etched in image in the background is an interesting way to start. Might not be for everybody, but my point of this video is to show one approach. And as I showed before, periodically you can put some ink back in there and check your progress, see what kind of changes are happening. It's still too soon to take a print. I think it probably at this point looks pretty awful. It's going to be a contest between the original image, the photograph, and out there somewhere in the world is a photographer who's probably incensed that I would use her or his photograph this way, but that's all I have to go on right now. This is not for publication, not without permission from the artist, the photographer behind that original image. This is called the hand wipe. We use that in printing mezzotents quite often, for dry points and mezzotents quite often. The hand is the really nice tool for wiping the plate. You can see the softness in the image. Up in here you can see the soft lines. It's just sort of shadowy. I'm getting curious about what this will look like as a print, so it's a feeling you get. You think, gosh, I wonder, maybe there's a nice print in there. Do you think? The other side I haven't touched, and so we've got a good idea as to how one of these photo etchings look without any dry point. Pretty light, but shows me where I am on this plate. Shows me I've got a lot more work to do if I were to continue, but this is just a little teaching video to get somebody started, and I'm not going to take this any further. I think you get the point. Thanks for watching. I'm Bill Ritchie.